All right. Welcome to Rise and Thrive podcast. We're here. Oh, hold on. Dude's gonna bark.
Bark, dude. Bark. Dude,
What are you
bark.
doing?
Ruff. Ruff.
You wanna go outside for a few minutes? Then you'll bark to come back in, which is better than barking in here. I'm just gonna let him alone. Welcome to Rise and Thrive. We're here with our weekly sip saying segments. Last week, I guess Thursday night, we did the topic of heroes, which I was MIA for. So we'll lean a lot on Tim for this episode. Tim, why did you choose heroes?
Yeah, sure. Missed you, Jade. Really weird not having you at Sip Saying. You're just like a feature, you know? It's amazing. Anyway,
Okay, well, I've missed like 4 out of 160.
it's true. I know. That's why it's so weird. It's just, wow, she's not going to be there.
Yeah.
Anyways, heroes. The topic of heroes was really inspired by the work of Joseph Campbell, who was a professor in American literature and stuff. But he wrote many books back in like the mid 1900s, if you will. It sounds so old. Mid 1900s, mid 20th century.
Right.
Anyway, you know, you're leaning on 70 years ago and stuff. But anyways, what's really particularly special about Joseph Campbell's work is he seemed to be the first person who really identified why we're so attracted to storylines and what happens in those storylines. And what he noticed and what he uncovered, it doesn't matter. Like he was big into mythology, right? So he was studying all the great mythologies of ancient times and things like this. But then he started seeing a thread, if you will, in the storyline of all of these mythologies, which then translates into religions, which then and also happens in the big stories that we've loved over time. And, you know, so in more contemporary times, you know, look at the big blockbuster movies that have like really stood the test of time, like Harry Potter and Star Wars.
Pretty Woman.
What's that?
Pretty Woman.
Pretty Woman. Well, sure. Actually, I'm sure we could like, you know, kind of dissect. We actually looked at a bunch of different movies. We even looked at Valley Girl actually on Thursday night and
I actually
tried
don't know that one.
follow the storyline, because ultimately what he talks about is all great stories. The reason why we're so compelled to be attracted to these stories is what he calls the hero's journey. All right, the hero's journey. So we started off by asking, you know, like, who's your favorite superhero? And so everyone talked about what their favorite superhero was and why and all this stuff. And of course, we connected to their wines to the topic of heroes. And then we went into this whole idea about understanding the hero's journey, right? And the hero's journey is, depending on how you look at it, is basically, it's either 12 steps or you can kind of break it down into 3 parts. And so those 3 parts are basically separation, initiation, and then return. So it's where one day like someone's just being ordinary, if you will. They're just living in the ordinary world, and then they get a call to adventure. You know, if you have any idea what that's like, Jade, a little call to adventure. But often at the beginning of the hero's journey, after someone's been called to the adventure, they usually would refuse it at first. You know, it's like, no, I can't do that. And all the reasons why kind of start showing up. And then what it typically then happens is that the person the reluctant hero, if you will, the potential hero, will end up coming across some kind of mentor. And that mentor takes all different kinds of forms. Sometimes it's actually a being, sometimes it's a spirit, sometimes, you know, like in Cinderella, it was the fairy godmother, for instance. You know, and at that point, when the mentor shows what's possible, then the hero will go from the ordinary world into, you know, a special world, a different world. And that's when things really begin to get crazy. Like probably the biggest quintessential blockbuster movie that had to do with this topic is The Matrix. right? It's just so evident in that. And then as you cross into the threshold, you start getting in against rubbing up against the obstacles of it, right? You think it's so great and all this stuff, and then all of a sudden there's obstacles, and you'll find out that you have enemies, and then but also allies will show up, and it begins to test you in a way. And then as you kind of keep going, eventually the hero will kind of get to this point of where needs to make a decision, right? And he or she will enter what we call the cave or something like that, where they have to go inside and really find out what's going on with them. And then eventually, inevitably, they'll face some kind of form of real high level trial, where they're going to have an ordeal. And then there's kind of a death of the old self and a rebirth of the new self. And then what they end up getting is a reward for that, right? There's some kind of reward for facing that fear, if you will. And that's the whole concept. And that reward is kind of like a jewel that's meant to be brought back. Okay. And that's what they end up doing, is then they're like, all right, well, I staying in this world doesn't help, right? Because you don't really have mastery of something until you take it back into the old world, if you will, to the ordinary world. So they're kind of rebirthed into a new version of themselves. And the whole idea is they return what they call returning with the elixir. And it's kind of like the story of the prodigal son. Like Jesus would be an easy one to point to, because he was famous, if you will, if he was a real guy, but let's say he was. And he said he wasn't, he never performed miracles in the city of his birth. Right? And then there's this real cool book called The 9 Faces of Christ, which is just a possible story of what happened between when Christ was like 13 and 30 kind of thing. And the trainings that he went through, and as he traveled around the worlds and all this stuff. But anyways, the return of the prodigal son is the son comes back with, or the daughter, or whatever it is. So let's not get all politically correct out there, right? But they come back and they have something. They have some kind of element of wisdom to pass on, right? So they return with the elixir, if you will. And that's where you really, get the juice, is where it can be all summed up. All the hero's journey can be summed up in the Zen story of the Zen student going to the master and saying, "Teacher, teacher," or "Master, master, what was life like before enlightenment?" And then master goes, "Chop wood, carried water."
Right.
And then the student goes, "Well, master, now what's life like after enlightenment?" He goes, "Chop wood, carry water." Right? But his relationship to why he does it and the meaning and significance of that is completely different.
Totally.
You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So, and ultimately, that's a long-winded version of why we did Heroes, and it was really fun. Like, we did all kinds of things, from exploring various favorite movies and storylines and stuff to I'll just stop there. There was some really fun fucking some of them were just like, "What? Really? Oh my God. Did somebody actually say that?"
Now I'm jealous. I'm sad that I missed it. I'm always sad when I miss it.
Well, you know what? The good news is this is such an important storyline, because it is like the storyline that follows everything that draws us. And this whole idea about the hero's journey is what it calls to us inside of each of us.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So, sometimes the hero has to leave, like, actually on a physical adventure somewhere, but more often than not, it's really about that inner journey, what you have to face, and what part of you has to die, kind of thing, what kind of ordeal you face. And then it's interesting when you start on that kind of inner journey as well, because you'll find out that the people who you thought were your support system in your ordinary world, when you get into the special world, they have a tendency to maybe not support this, because it triggers in them their reluctance to actually enter the hero's journey. So very
Absolutely. Yeah.
So we're going to spend some time on this. We're going to do another one next week. So we're going to spend a little bit of time on this whole hero's journey.
So is that what we're doing next week? Heroes Part 2?
Well, it's an easy pickings, if you will, that's happening out there is Easter. Right? And of course, Easter is all about, in the Christian world, the resurrection of Christ.
Mm-hmm.
So resurrection is one of the steps in the hero's journey. So we're going to do resurrection,
Sweet.
to pay homage to people of, that faith, but we're going to leave all the dogma out of it and just get into the mythology, if you will, and explore these ideas, because I think all of the great religions, if we can call them that, over time have this story wrapped inside of them, but we separate, thinking that our story is better than your story.
Right. So do you remember, I'm sure you do, you always remember, a couple of the takeaways from last night or from Thursday night?
Now that you said, I always remember.
I set you up for failure. I'm sorry.
I did. You did. One of the biggest takeaways that I can share about you is the tragedy of the hero, and what I would call that is, or how I would describe that, is the tragedy of. There's a couple of sticking points, bottlenecks on that hero's journey.
Right.
I believe that the hero's journey is what we're all here to go through, and it's not one just linear path. You just don't start and stop. You all of a sudden, hey, done. Right? It's a repeating cycle, and you're going to have the hero's journey in different areas of life. But one of the biggest takeaways is, for me, upon reflection, is the tragedy of the hero. And what that means is there's a couple of places in that journey where people turn back and they don't move forward. And then they live in this life of quiet suffering, for the rest of eternity, right? Like they never access their genius. And I think that's what I think genius is really, really where we can help people to tap into that genius and have the courage that, this world that we're living in is if we keep going in the trajectory that it needs to go into, or that it's going in and it needs to go in, because that's the way it is, will even the species of humans survive, right? So this whole idea about saving the world is all bullshit from my point of view. The world's going to be fine. The Earth's going to be fine. It's the humans, the species that, might be shaken off and removed if we don't fix that. But once again, if you understand the hero's journey, there's a death in there that needs to happen, right? So just opening up the possibility of that maybe this is the best thing for humanity. It's not a fun conversation, but it's an important conversation if you understand. Mm-hmm. When people seem to make the most decisions for change is when they're facing some kind of impossible moment, like death, for instance.
Right. Interesting. I love it. I'm going to have to get that recording from you.
Maybe.
Awesome.
Yeah, cool.
So,
super fun, and I look forward to continuing that conversation, because I think it gets, I don't know, for me, it gets me all jazzed up. So it's fun.
Sweet. I can tell. Cool. So next week we're doing resurrection.
Yeah.
So if anybody is curious, they can pop over to sipsang.com, request an invitation with Tim. He'll hop on the phone with you or whatever, and kind of let you know the ins and outs, so to speak.
Yeah, for sure.
And also, if somebody's here. So I guess we'll just leave it at that.
Sounds good.
Anything else you want to add on, or?
No, that's good. Happy to talk with anybody who has interest, and if nothing else, go look up the hero's journey for yourself, and it's worth knowing.
Awesome. Thanks, Tim.
Right. Thanks, Jade.
All right.
Bye.
Ready?
Yeah.
All right. Well, hello and welcome to Rise and Thrive. We're here with another blah 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 blah. It's gonna be one of those days.
Have a sip. Everyone have a sip. Everyone have a sip.
Places.
Circle the wagons.
I like it better when we start giggling.